Hey, Sam, you come up with that intro line?
You didn't tell me that was today.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Writers' Room with Sam and Jim. This is the show where, as you probably know by now, we bring aspiring writers into our writers' room to help them work on and develop their story. And we're going to do that with Yasmin Asif today in just a little bit. But first, Sam wants to go off about something. Sam, what you got?
All right, I want to talk about betrayal.
Betrayal?
Yes, and this is television betrayal because I watched a show that I will remain nameless because I try never to bag on television shows on the microphone.
Yes, definitely not on air.
No, but every room I'm in, we always talk about what we're watching, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the way we talk about it is the way other groups of people might talk about sports.
Right.
We'll talk about every aspect. We'll talk about the players. We'll talk about how well they did. We'll talk about...
Great run game, but those linebackers, man, they're going to get creamed every week until they fix that shit.
In our case, it'll be, oh, I love this storyline, but how's this one working with it? I don't get it. Or, oh, you haven't watched it? We've been telling you for 2 months to watch the show. We're going to spoil it now. And then, it just goes on and on and on. We're TV writers. Well, if I'm going to stay with the sports metaphor, this team came out for this season and they just tripped as they came out.
Oh.
And then they pretended like nothing happened and they just kept tripping. And it hurt me because I've watched a bunch of seasons of this show and I'm watching it within 5 minutes. Well, there's nobody else with me. but
You're looking around for someone to share your pain and confusion.
Well, I'm talking to the screen. Do you do this? Do you talk to the screen?
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, I'll talk to the I'm like, and I literally, what's happening? What? No. Yeah. And it's not even the plot. The writing, it was like someone had taken over the show.
Right.
And they were doing a copy of a copy of a copy of the show.
Right.
When we used to get spec scripts and you're like, and we get, every now and again, we saw a spec script of Haven and we're like, this is not the show. Because we knew the DNA so much.
Right.
And so I know the DNA of the show. It's been a while, a number of seasons. And I'm watching and the dialogue is like, it's the kind of dialogue that every writer writes when they're just spewing it out. And they just went and said, well, let's just shoot that. And I thought, well, okay, maybe I'm not getting it. Maybe I don't like the show as much as I thought I did. And then I'm watching it and then the characters aren't doing anything. They're acting like figures.
New showrunner? What happened?
No. And so I'm wondering what is going on with the show. And what's worse is I'm watching more and more of it. So I can't give up. I'm in a bad relationship now.
Wow.
Where I'm just being insulted and abused and I'm taking it because I'm hoping that he'll change. And he doesn't change and he just keeps beating on me.
Wait a minute. Are we talking about TV or is this something about our writing partnership?
This is nothing to do with you. If you wrote this stuff, I would say to you, all right, good rough draft. I would say that. And you'd be like, yeah. And if you had written if this is your 10th draft, you would have pretended like that was your rough draft.
Right.
Or more truthfully in our relationship, you will hand me a draft. I will do the same to you. And you say, I just couldn't get it. And could you take a look at this and try to fix it?
Something's not working here for me. Maybe you got it.
And that's the best thing about a writer's room is good rooms that are not everyone trusts each other, and we've certainly been in them. They'll bring in the crap, and they're like, I couldn't get it. Could somebody help me with this? And someone else maybe could, or you'll get in the room, you'll re-break it, and figure out, the problem wasn't the dialogue. The problem was the character is not behaving in a way consistent, blah, blah, blah.
There's actually no turn in the scene.
Yeah, the scene sucks in its conception. Let's fix it. It was scene after scene after scene of this. And then it was so bad that when we got to the finale of the season, I stopped watching it in the middle.
Wow.
Because I was so upset.
You can't anytime you can stop watching the finale of a TV series in the middle. It's gone dreadfully wrong.
And things are going nuts in the middle of it, and I was like, I can't take it. Not because I'm afraid for the character, because sometimes honestly I get a little afraid for the character and I'm like, this is too intense. I got to go to bed.
That's
I'll watch
good.
it tomorrow.
That's actually good stop in the middle.
That's a good stop in the middle. And it's not because, oh my God, my daughter is choking to death and do I watch the rest of the season or do I save her life?
Always a tough call.
That's a tough one. But this one was, I had nothing better to do. I was on a plane.
Man, captive audience, and you can't finish it.
And I'm watching my iPad, and I couldn't finish it. And I was struck by a couple things. First of all, this season of television was an embarrassment, considering how much money was spent on it and all that. But also, how great the show must have been before, because I was so invested.
Right.
Because we've all watched shows that we don't like. And you watch an episode 2, you say either not for me or that was terrible or whatever. But to actually be in it and then have it all turn, it has to be like a relationship when everything started out so great and then it got a little less, but still good. You love the people. And then at the end, you're turning off the finale. And then I forgot that I turned off the finale. And a couple days later, I was opening my iPad. Oh, yeah, I forgot whatever happened on that show. And I watched the last 14 minutes or whatever the heck it was when everything resolves and did not care.
Oh, and it made all your thoughts about the rest of the season suddenly irrelevant because it made sense out of the whole thing and why it didn't work all the way along.
No, it just petered out into a little puddle of crap at the end, and I just felt dirty, used, and betrayed. And that's what I want to talk about.
I can't wait to get off the microphone and find out what show this is. Okay, let's get into this week's show.
Hi, Yasmin.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Hi, Yasmin. It's Jim.
Hi.
What time is it there? It's nighttime, isn't it?
No, it's 6:30, so I just finished work.
Jim, you're going to have to do this show because I'm being very overwhelmed and intimidated by her accent.
Yes, you're going to break into your Scottish, German, Italian accent.
It's only a matter of time. It's only a matter of time. I'm sorry, Yasmin. I'm not in any way mocking you, but I think my insecurities, whenever I talk to someone with an accent, I just start speaking with an accent. Not related to any country, by the way. It's the country of anxiety.
Strange new world.
Yeah.
Hi, welcome to the show.
Hi, yeah, thanks. Thank you for having me.
So you were here for grad school in Columbia in Chicago, is that right?
Yes, I was, yeah. So I developed quite a weird accent, actually, in the 2 years that I spent there. I was convinced I still sounded like myself every time I came back, and then about a year after I moved back, everyone went, no, you sounded really weird.
So did you read that article about Columbia Film School in the New York Times recently? Was it the New York Times or was it Twitter? I don't know, actually.
Well, they're equally credible news sources.
About the incredibly small percentage of people from Columbia University that make money relative to the amount they've spent.
After an MFA.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did. I thought it was really interesting. And I think understandable too, kind of sad. I mean, especially when you're spending so much money on your education, but it's obviously doing an MFA is a big decision, and it's tough considering how much everyone thinks that an MFA is going to help you along, to then have seen that article and be like, oh, guess I was wrong.
Well, luckily you're going to break the mold. You're going to be the exception to the rule here.
Thank you. Yeah, hopefully.
The thing about the MFA is, does any MFA in any fine arts field pay off that way? The problem is
that word "arts" in the MFA, right?
It seems like if you're going to spend $200,000 or $300,000, I don't know what it costs, but hundreds of thousands of dollars, it's hard to make that money back. And doctors have trouble making that money back,
right?
And are hobbled by that debt for a decade or longer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really tough. I think education needs a serious overhaul.
As parents with kids soon to go to college, we thoroughly agree with you, Yasmin.
We certainly do. System is broken. So broken. So much of this country is broken. You know, we've worked with people who've gone to film school, writers in writers' rooms, and we work with people who, of course, probably the majority who haven't. And I never know. There's no magic thing that a person, in my experience, comes in with having done it. I think classes are huge. I do think classes are great.
You have to learn. There's craft, right? And you can learn craft if you go to class with teachers.
Right. But I don't think it actually. So if people are sitting there deciding from the side of the table for the dudes who did not go to film school and made a career, I don't see the value. But what do you think, Yasmin? Do you have a different view on it, or do you think it was worth it?
It's very hard for me. I veer depending on each day, in my opinion of it. There were a lot of pros for me. I did a lot of stuff that I would never have done otherwise. Like, I spent 2 years volunteering at Sundance and stuff, and met people that way. And I've met a lot of really good friends who have been very helpful, like when I'm brainstorming like scripts and stuff with them. But equally, some of the things that I expected going into it, I did not receive or achieve or whatever. I think it's a mixed bag for me. I'm not necessarily certain that I personally would do it again, but that's very much also because of the situation that I'm in. Like, obviously, film school, one of the most useful things about it is that you get a network.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to build my network in Chicago and then moved back to the other side of the world and had to start again.
Yeah.
So I was very lucky in that I got a job almost immediately when I did move back, but that's not that's not going to happen to everyone, and might not even happen to me again. So
What are you doing now in London?
So I work for an independent scripted drama production company, and I am currently working as a personal assistant, but I've got my finger in all the pots, basically. So I do a lot of development and production support too.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, that's a great education in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've learned a lot, like working in this job and in my other jobs, and I would say as much as I did while I was at film school, yeah.
So I think this is interesting because you're on the track to be an executive or production person, but you also are a writer, which is cool because I have to say most of the people that we have ever worked with who are executives, good ones and not so good ones, none of them have been writers. I don't think a single one of them that I remember could take an idea and craft a script. Do you remember anything?
There's a few I know that were writers or wanted to be writers.
Right.
I think more that wanted to be and for whatever reason
Right.
gave it up or found they didn't.
I just thought of one dude. But you see how, regardless, it's just not common. Does that make you, I wonder if that makes you much better at your job because now you know what the writer is facing if you, as an executive. And frankly, as a writer, you know how you'll understand how the executive is trying to get something out of you, but they don't know maybe necessarily how to express it, how to verbalize what they're trying to say, which I think is
yeah. Hopefully it'll be useful.
Well, I think you're going to be a double threat here.
Yeah, that's right. You're going to have a lot of skills knowing both sides of the game.
So let's jump into your idea.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a dark comedy feature called Cookie Cutters, and it's about a group of Girl Scouts, primarily led by a girl called Elsie, who's very type A. And she's trying to, basically they get into a gang war with like a money launderer and stuff and end up murdering a lot of people.
Yes, I saw the title is Cookie Cutters. Kind of love that.
What? How old is Elsie?
So they're all 15, 16.
This is fantastic.
So it's primarily like the engine of it is that the money laundering like revolves around cookies. So this is the annual Girl Scout cookie sale, which is sort of why they start being like, oh, we have to take them down. And alongside that, she's very driven and she's like trying to get into Harvard and stuff. And so she wants to get the Girl Scout Gold Award, which enables you to apply for a lot of scholarships and stuff. And fundamentally, underneath all of that, it's very much about like being a sort of second or third generation immigrant and feeling a lot of pressure to make your parents proud and to feel that their sacrifices were worthwhile, regardless of sort of whether they necessarily think that you need to do that or not.
That's a good personal drive.
That's
I like
great.
that.
I don't think you need to talk to us. I think you got the fun. Of course, you've seen Election, right, with the Reese Witherspoon, Matthew Broderick.
Matthew Broderick, yeah.
Because Reese, for those who haven't seen this movie, which is now going back a ways, but Reese Witherspoon is the very driven girl, a teenage girl running for some school office, in her high school, and Matthew Broderick, for some reason, he plays a teacher, and he gets in her way for some reason. I don't remember why. And she has to destroy him. That's how I remember it. That may not be what it is.
Yeah, I barely remember that much about it.
But her intensity is what's Elsie's intensity. That's what I remember. And it was just this stupid office, she took it so seriously. And this is a woman that was going to be the future president of the United States. There's no question. More in the Trump mold, I think, than anything else. But definitely she was going to be that person. So that's I'm not in any way, I'm saying I get it right away. Jim, you get that, right?
Yeah.
Now, the question I have for you, and this goes to you, is, your name is Yasmin Asif. What is your ethnicity? And what is the ethnicity of Elsie? And how do you want that to play in there, if at all?
Yeah, so I am quarter Indian. My grandpa emigrated from India back in the late 50s. So at the moment, Elsie is of Hispanic descent. She has a friend called Priya who is Indian as well. What I want is, and this is one of the things that I'm not sure is coming through, I feel like I have a very sort of complicated relationship with my identity. A lot of the stuff that I think about or, you know, write about is about how, you know, you're not one thing enough and you're not the other thing enough, and you feel this pressure to be one way or the other way. And that's one of the things that I want to come through. But equally, one of the reasons why I wrote Cookie Cutters is that I'm kind of sick of like films and media that are about people of color being like, oh God, they're like, it's all so focused on the struggles that they have with their identity or with their culture or stuff, or, you know, so much of TV and film about Black people has historically been about slavery and stuff, and it's like, can't we see another story?
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, yeah, a little girl that starts murdering people will be great.
Well, let me ask you a question. Personally, I love that. Right, I think you're after a complicated identity question here, right? Like it gets different, and generation to generation it gets different for children of immigrants and the children of the children of immigrants. The question I have for Yasmin is: are you sure you want to transfer that into a different culture? Because I expect that. I don't know what flavor of Latin you made Elsie, but I imagine that culture has a different experience of those questions than maybe you have had.
Boy, you just want to... Jim has just
no.
wanted to grab that third rail and hold on to it while he licks the other third rail. No, I get it. It's a completely fair question. No, I'm not trying to make you defensive. I'm just identifying that this is going to be an interesting conversation because it's a very scary one to have in a lot of ways. So go ahead, Yasmin. I'm curious to hear what you have to say about it.
No, I think that's totally fair. It is something that I asked myself a lot when I first started writing it. And what I found was that it kind of helped me to explore the question more without it being so personal. But sure. I do understand that, like, it is something that I really need to think about. And one of the things that I found really interesting when people sort of read one of the early drafts that I'd written was a lot of people didn't pick up that Elsie's friend Priya was Indian. And I think and it was interesting to me because it was so deeply embedded in who she was, and Priya is an Indian name and stuff like that, until someone Indian read it and they were like, and I said, oh, people think that Priya's white, and she was like, I mean, she's just clearly not.
Interesting.
So, yeah, I don't know.
She's clearly not. How is she clearly not? Besides the name, and maybe you put in the action line, she's Indian.
yeah. But
you would think that would be a clue.
But other than those two things, how is she not just a white Brit?
Just sort of some of their conversations around like how they related to the people in their lives and stuff. I feel like it was kind of obvious. But I also may be totally misreading that. So
it may be obvious to you also because, I mean, that just a straight writing thing where we write things that we think are completely clear, and then the note is, could you clarify this, which is probably the most common note that I know I give we do ourselves, and I know I give to other people, and they give it to me. So it's always, I don't get it. But I just want to address the fact, Yasmin, that you are totally fucked. Okay, I just wanted to accept this right now, and I want to embrace it because we're in a weird place, and Jim and I are two white guys. Although my father says that Jews aren't white, but I think that's because he got beat up as a kid for being Jewish by white people, so he's decided it's different. I didn't get beat up because I was faster than my father, and so I always ran from the guys who were trying to beat me up for being Jewish. But from my perspective, as a sort of white guy, is you're kind of fucked either way. Because if Indian people can only write Indian stuff, well, that's ridiculous. That's racist. Why would that? You're saying an Indian person couldn't write a white person, and that's ridiculous. But if Indian people try to write Latin people, now you're fucked because no, only Latin should be able to write that. Right. And it's a catch-22. And then if you're a white guy, well, then forget it. You can't write any of that stuff. But if you don't write any of those characters, well, then you're a racist because why are you just writing white stuff? And I don't know what the answers here, and I don't participate in this discussion online because it's too fraught, and everybody's very intense about it. But I don't feel like
any answer is a wrong answer to somebody.
So we're in that bucket of fucked writers too. I think everybody is. There's no clear. The only thing that's safe is if you're a person of color writing about a person of color that is exactly the same as you. Then you're safe.
Limited, but safe.
Right, which is completely unfair, it seems
Right,
to me, because you're
not,
limited.
Right, that's not fair either.
So, Yasmin, what's the answer to this problem right now? JR, JR, who's Latin. Yeah, what do you got?
Well, I think this sort of idea really speaks to me because of the biracial issue. I mean, as a biracial person, you often feel, or at least I often feel, that I am not brown enough to write Latin characters that people would identify with. But at the same time, I don't feel like I identify with the white characters as well. It's sort of this middle ground, and I think what Yasmin is trying to accomplish by highlighting that is a real blind spot that we're missing a lot right now.
I agree. That sounds great.
Yasmin, what do you think?
Yeah, thanks, JR. Yeah, she is mixed race, and I totally agree. It's so hard, and I also do find it a bit of a blind spot, like, and not just in media, in my whole life. Like a couple of months ago, my Indian grandpa went, "Do you think you're Indian?" And I was like, "Wow, okay, that's a big question to unpack here, Grandpa, while you're stuffing samosas down."
Although, when would you rather have that discussion other than when there are samosas involved?
I don't know. Well, maybe after I've had a bit more time to think about that, my response to that question. But yeah, I don't know. I had a very interesting. I don't know. It's so hard, and I think we are all kind of fucked. And I had a very interesting conversation with someone when I was in Chicago about this. She wanted me to write a short for her, which was about two Ghanaian girls going back to Ghana. And I was like, I would love to. I love working with you, but I obviously have absolutely no reason to write this whatsoever apart from that. But when we had this conversation, we realized that we had so much in common. And I think that being third culture or mixed race, it does have a lot of universality, which I think we definitely should explore. And I'm not saying that, it should be specific people exploring it, but I definitely think there are so many great stories that can be told. And I think a lot of people feel like they're not one thing enough or not another thing enough. Yeah, I would just like to see more of it because I have a very weird relationship with my identity.
And I think that one great strength that we have is that we've got one foot in each world. And so we can kind of act like a translator in some situations, talking between the two races and create a conversation that a lot of people wouldn't think of.
And that's been my experience working with people of color and women and everybody who's different from me in ethnicity, is that it's easy for me. I feel like my role in those conversations is to deal with the 75% of that character that is completely universal. It's just the emotions are constant.
Characters are characters. Human struggle is what it is.
All of that. And then for that slice that I don't have the first-hand knowledge of, that's when I am really looking towards that person who has lived that life to bring that out and say, well, we're dealing with, say, betrayal. Right. And here is a form of betrayal that I've experienced or seen or read about or am familiar with in some way because of who I am. And the specifics are great that way. And that's why you got to have mixed rooms, which we all know to be true. Of course, the downside of that, and this is where it gets dangerous, is if I disagree with the specifics that come up because I don't buy them, right? Am I disagreeing because I don't buy them from an emotional place, or am I disagreeing because it's not my experience? And so I sit there when I hear this stuff, and my brain is going so fast to try to identify why I like something or why I don't, and to sort of see if I'm having some unconscious bias against it, or if I'm looking for something that's conventional that I've seen before, which, by the way, I've probably seen on television, which was probably written by someone not of color. And so it's
and often in a room there will be one person of some given stripe, whatever it is,
right? And
so you're like, well, is this that single person's experience,
right,
or is it representative of a larger experience? It probably is to some degree, but how much? And is it okay to push that aside because it doesn't fit the story that you're trying to tell? It doesn't feel true to that. Like,
And then another thing, which is then that person of color, say JR, does JR want to be the representative
right.
of all Latino characters in this show and educate everyone else in the room who is not Latino? So,
That's a lot to carry around in a room.
It's a lot, man. And I feel like we're ground zero for this. And by ground zero, I mean 2 smoking holes in the ground that have been blown up.
But this is also the most important work that we could be doing right now, right? Like, there's a window, it feels, of true assimilation and of people trying to talk to each other, which is part of what's provoking the response against that, right? Like,
what do you mean by assimilation, white man? I'd like to hear about this.
No, I don't mean assimilation. Maybe I
Processing
can't think of the right word. I'm trying to building a culture that is actually built out of all of its component parts, rather than pulling everyone into predefined roles within a pre-established culture.
Yasmin, I'm going to ask you to weigh in, and JR, on an argument that Jim and I had about this issue that which Jim is touching on. So we wrote a script, and it's the lead is, his name is Khalid, and early on his name's Khalid, and we wanted to make him Muslim in a way, Muslim, but not necessarily Muslim in the sense that he is, he's more
fervent.
Muslim. Yeah, he's Muslim like the way I'm a Jew, or JR's Christian, or any. Just, it's part of our identity, but it's not. Yeah. We're not religious. And I wanted him to pray 5 times. I wanted him to throw the mat down because I thought it was nice, and we could dig into that. And Jim was like, no, this is in the future. This is a sci-fi thing. It's in the future, and he wanted to be post-racial in a way. Like, we have moved beyond that. And I was like, no, that's racist. Because why would we want to move beyond these things? And he was like, this is like a Star Trek world where we're past all this. Although those have been cured in the world here.
Well, cured is a big word. That's not necessarily what I'm saying, but it is a question, right? Like, what is, if we do assimilate together to make some larger culture, what is that going to look like, and how much do these individual strains survive in a world where every voice is sort of equally talking with each other?
Yasmin, I'm right? We should totally have made a Muslim and praying.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, I mean, just from a logical standpoint, religion has survived for such a long time. I don't know if it would go away even in a sci-fi world.
Mm-hmm.
I think that when we have all sort of combined in everything, I do think that there will still be some kind of religious observance, even if you necessarily don't believe it. And it's hard. I mean, speaking from personal experience, my grandpa is Muslim and he doesn't believe in God, but he does still pray because he was brought up culturally to do that. And he was like, that's what I do. So I do wonder if, I don't know, 10 generations down the line, if people weren't doing it, would they see? Is it just a thing that we do? But I mean, God, I've got no answer. I don't believe in God, so.
Well, all right.
Meanwhile, there was a story you came here with questions about.
I know. That's right. So let's get back to cookie cutters. So I think after this conversation, I'm going to take the position that Yasmin absolutely should make her Latin.
She should write whatever. You can write whatever you want.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And as a Latino on the podcast, I'm all for it.
You have permission. There you go.
There you go.
Thank you, JR.
Yeah. JR has blessed this for you. No,
I'll put that on my cover page.
Yes. I actually think, as writers, we have to write, we have to stretch, and we have to do it. And by the way, you may show it to a friend of yours who is Latin and say, hey, what do you think about this? Have I hit anything? You have any ideas? And he or she can help you flesh it out. But we would do the same thing if we were writing about, librarians. We'd go talk to a librarian and say, what's your day? What are your challenges? I'm more afraid than JR. JR, sure, I'm terrified. So this is a feature. So where are we going to end up? Where do you want to end up with this?
So where I want to end up is basically a sort of Pyrrhic victory.
Nice.
So she loses her friends. One of them actually dies. And I think one of the key relationships that she has is with her mother, with trying to prove herself to her mother, make her proud of her, So I think that something needs to happen with her relationship to her mum. But at the moment, at least where I'm leaning is she gets into Harvard, but she's lost basically everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of when she realizes that, final scene or whatever, she gets to Harvard and she's like, oh yeah, this totally wasn't worth it.
So sort of the opposite of risky business.
What
where
the Risky business. What the? I
There's
can't.
a-
No. Let me enjoy that just for a moment. You just threw that all the way out there.
High school kid
Yeah.
trying to get into college, finds himself enmeshed in an underworld situation. A lot of stuff goes haywire. At the end, Tom Cruise is going, "This is great. I'm going to, so I don't get into the college I want to go to. I've become this money-making, basically pimp," which in the 80s, that everyone thought that was a great movie. It's actually feels like a more grounded version of it. You go into this bitter war to get into the college you wanted.
Cookie Cutters is more grounded.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And you find that it wasn't worth what you did, which is sort of the story of trying to get into college in general. You jump through a million hoops and get brutalized just to get to some school so you can pay them a ton of money. Is that really worth that these days?
Maybe it sounds like I have a vendetta against my MSA.
This is coming full circle to Columbia, isn't it? So I just have to point out or react to the idea that there's a humor aspect, and I assume that's why you have Girl Scouts who are murdering, getting killed. It's the violence, that juxtaposition. I mean, that's gold, really. Is that what you're thinking about?
Yeah, absolutely. I do. I want it to be funny. I have a very dark, very dry English sense of humor. So I'm thinking, like, at the moment, one of the set pieces is a car chase, but it's one of the Girl Scouts in a forklift, like going at 10 miles an hour with the guy like chasing after her or whatever. So I definitely, I want it to be, say a lot, not just about sort of identity and stuff, but also about like very much a feminist. So like what girls can do, even if it's not necessarily murder, but also be, funny.
Well, I wonder what kind of merit badges this Girl Scout troop is going to get.
Yeah, so they get like knife throwing merit badges.
Right.
I'm just thinking, full disclosure here, the first thing we ever sold out here was a feature called The Mary Kay Mafia. And it was about a bunch of women who sold Mary Kay in Tupperware and whatever in a small town in North Dakota. And a Russian mail-order bride shows up in town and empowers them by getting them to sort of mob up and begin criminalizing their activities in much the same kind of tone.
That's amazing. Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of
I just think there's something great about women banding together to kill people,
especially when they're 15. I like that.
Yeah,
I do.
especially when they're 15.
But I'm interested in the idea that the other gang is conventional and idiotic in a male gang criminal way. Because gangsters are there's an underlying, even though they're violent and they may be clever in some ways, they are trapped, and whether they know it or not. And it's a horrible choice that they've made because they usually end up in jail or dead. And it doesn't really work. It just works for a while. And the question is, are these women beating them at that? After initial losses, are they figuring it out? Are they cracking the code, which is interesting? Is that what's happening in here? Or what's the growth that these women are they getting to be better criminals? What are those kind of things like? What's the arc there for them?
So Elsie's very much the driving force, and it begins, I think, with her sort of being like, "Oh, this will be not a bit of fun, but like, it's not that deep. We'll just sort of take them out." And then they retaliate, and suddenly it becomes very serious. And then she just goes, "Great, I guess we've got to hit them back harder, I suppose."
Mm-hmm.
So they do get better. Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say that they beat them at their own game. They're all kind of ineffective, but yeah.
They become criminals, but then they get out because they have a loss. One of them doesn't get out, and then they get out. So it's an escalation all the way. Do you establish them as good scouts to begin with? Are they a good troop? Is that the start?
Currently, the start, I've established the troop as being a little bit different from other Girl Scouts. So Elsie is like defusing a bomb using a robot, essentially. But they're not good, which is one of the things that I wonder about, because I don't know, it's like, do I want it to be almost Shakespearean in their downfall, or like how do I marry that with seeding that, within an hour and a half that these 15-year-olds are totally prepared to end up sort of chopping up dead bodies and dissolving them in lye while they wear hazmat suits and then going on with their day.
It seems like at some level you're telling a story of the price of ambition, right? And of the duty to your parents to fulfill their ambitions for you.
Mm-hmm.
So then it becomes a question of, well, if they've worked so hard to succeed and have succeeded, they're in the process of succeeding when this force of the money launderers collides with what they have underway. I would understand a retaliation against that idea.
I would go a little different, though, which is if they are not successful as Girl Scouts, they're trying, and then this comes along and they find out they're in their desperation to become good Girl Scouts, they step on the toes of the gang. By stepping on the toes of the gang, doesn't kill them because they're just Girl Scouts, but they fuck with them. But now they are so desperate to be good Girl Scouts that they are unwilling to allow themselves to be messed with by the gang, because they want to be good Girl Scouts. So they mess back against the gang, and it starts escalating. The whole point of this, the start of it, is they just want to be good Girl Scouts, but they're terrible at it. But then, as they're in this battle with it becomes clear that maybe they'll never be good Girl Scouts, but they're pretty good gangsters, right? And that, which is the turn, it's one of the many turns, but it's the escalation, I guess, where we're like, and now they are in a full gang war, and at some point, they now have the money and all of this. So they go back to the Girl Scout Jamboree, and I'm just using this as but they're showing up at the Girl Scout Jamboree in whatever the equivalent of, the Girl Scout equivalent of Gucci and Mercedes and all that stuff. So they kind of earned it in a whole different way.
But then they pay the price, which leaves one of them dead.
Right.
For that success.
And they are, right, and then, so they get that glory, they pay the price, and now they're in a hole, and they have to get out of it. And so they have to come together in a way. That sounds tropey, and it is, trite rather, but they come together to defeat the gang, not to become but to actually escape this box they've gotten them into, and to reconnect with who they used to be. And they do that, but of course, they do get out from under the gang, but they can't ever go back to who they used to be. And that's why Harvard now leaves us sad. I think that's it. Okay, Yasmin, good luck. And that's 93 pages right there.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you.
But
that's a good version of the story.
I'm just bouncing back to Yasmin, what I think she was talking about. Is that in line with what you were thinking, Yasmin?
Yeah, I think it definitely is. There's like a couple of things. There's a couple of things where I haven't quite hit it properly, and I think I couldn't necessarily work out why it wasn't working. And I think what you've given me is like just the cleanest and best version of that, essentially. I did a lot of thinking about how I could like trim it down, but I think fundamentally there were just a couple of things that were muddied.
I think the thing I gave you was just a simpler version, not necessarily better, because I think what happens is, and this goes back to our earlier conversation about being Latin, being Indian, all those things, we don't need a lot of story, a lot of plot. The plot that I gave you was hopefully, I think I was trying to just reflect back to you what you said, but I now want you to leave room for
the details,
all the details, which is going to bring out all those specific and delicious scenes that are serving that larger story, but are actually, really digging into these characters' home lives and how they interact with each other, and do they have their own hierarchy? Is the white girl at the top and the Indian girl at the bottom, or vice versa? And what does that mean?
Well, and there's the larger thematic question here, right? It's the simplest, most basic level. This is about ambition and duty. What do you do to fulfill the ambitions of your parents, your own ambitions for life? What should you want, right? And it starts off with wanting to get into Harvard, and selling cookies is a way to do that, and then there's this diversion into crime, and then you wind up in this place at the end of the story where you've sort of gone both roads. And what are you saying about that? And I think that's the real question that's going to build a lot of those other scenes, is where do you want to wind up? What is your final comment about what's good or bad, or what should people want, or how should you feel about these things?
Well, I think she's talked about that Pyrrhic victory for that thing, which is...
I know it's Pyrrhic victory, but the question is, what exactly are you saying?
What are you saying, Yasmin?
I think where I want to land is that it's not, rather than what you achieve, it's who you have in your life. I think her real drive, whether it's to get into Harvard or to do whatever, is to connect with her mum. And it's not necessarily that.
You say collect with her mom? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay, because we haven't talked about her. That's interesting. You didn't bring up the parents along the way. And I only mentioned that to say you've got her community is her Girl Scout troop. So how are you going to bring her mom into that? Is she the troop leader? Is she or the troop mom or whatever it is? I don't. My girls didn't do Girl Scouts, so I don't know how it works. But is she a fundamental character then?
I'd never thought of making her the troop leader. But I think that kind of totally makes sense because she is not as fundamental as she needs to be. Like I think she is a fundamental character, but at the moment you only see her through being Elsie's mum. You don't really see her through any other kind.
Yeah, because that is a key piece. If your final message is that it's about who you're writing with, not where you're going, then that needs to be your question off the top. In a way, is ignoring that or not being aware of that being the important thing, neglecting that in some way, but it's got to register throughout that that's somehow the thing that she's not dealing with.
I mean, the simple version of it, and I don't mean it to be the good version, but the simple version is, yes, she's the troop leader, and she is actually embarrassed by this troop, or the troop's failure affects her because of the fact that she's a woman that is not accepted by these other troop ladies, which are all of a different class, race or class or both. So what happens with Elsie is she sees her mother, or Priya, or both, if they have two moms are involved, they see their moms being marginalized. So the reason they have to succeed is because they're furious about how their moms are treated by the other moms, and that escalates everything. And that would all. The only reason I bring that up is that makes the mom's emotional journey part of the characters. It connects them automatically, as opposed to the mom is a lawyer somewhere and she's looking for success. You know what I mean?
I'll give you a slightly different piece that might fit in there too, which is if Elsie is not accepting of the other members of her troop in some way, whether she superficially feels alienated from them, but ultimately doesn't feel like they're keeping up their end of the bargain. Say that she's better than them, she's closer to getting Harvard, she's closer to achieving her goals, but they're a drag on her. Then you get the reversal at the end of she's realized that being with them and what they've done to support each other was actually the thing that she should have been valuing all along, but up front she was more dismissive of them because they did not align with her goals. And
I get that. Help me understand what's that got to do with the mom.
I'm not trying to address the mom. I'm talking about the theme. I'm talking about the theme of the story, right? Like if the thing is you got to value the people that you're writing with, then in some way she needs to not be valuing them off the top.
Yeah, okay, so that's a different thing to talk about, but that's good too. So these are all looking at identity from different angles, which I think is great, because we don't necessarily want to do it just one way.
And that's where you get into specifics of, well, why isn't she connecting with her mom? Why isn't she valuing the other girls in the troop? Whatever the hindrances are to Elsie's realization and fulfillment that she gets at the end, that all comes out of the specifics of her identity and the specific obstacles in her life.
Is that overwhelming, Yasmin? Because it is to me. That's a lot. That's a lot to sort of juggle while you're trying to break story.
I don't think it's overwhelming. It's definitely a lot to think about, but there's a lot of really good points in there. And I think I want to say a lot, and I need to really make it so, I need to be concise in what I'm saying. And I really like that idea of examining identity from loads of different ways, and Elsie not connecting with the people in her troop and stuff. She's definitely, I think, someone that wouldn't. And the stuff with her mum as well, I think, yeah, totally could work.
I think the thing I would recommend in the process, the way and maybe I'm projecting, this might be the way I would get bound up. Maybe it won't bind you up. But it's kind of like what I always try to do is when we're writing, I kind of try to forget the backstory that we've come up with a little bit and just live in the moments and get a structure. And then once I have a story that we have a story that works, then go back to what we were trying to say again and try to flesh it out. But at least now we have a shape to build on. Whereas I think if you are trying to achieve too much, like I'm going to show this aspect of being disconnected from your friends or your ethnicity or your mom in every scene, you can get constipated. You know what I mean? It's just too hard.
And the flip side of that too is, I think when you're starting out, what you want to do is display all that stuff through plot. And what's really more important is getting that baked into your character. You know, in what way, when you bring Elsie into a scene, she's going to be having reactions that are based out of whatever her fundamental beliefs are about who she should be and who she is and what the people around her are and whether, they're people she wants in her life. And that'll come out in scenes just as she is being, if you let that be a guide for her and her interactions, the kinds of choices she's making in scenes will be informed by that belief, and then you're going to change that belief in her as you go along because it's going to.
So what would be? Well, let's get into the example of that though, because that's 40,000 feet, and I wonder if we can say is there an example of a choice that Elsie would make in some generic scene?
Sure. There's she's in a scene with a couple of her other Girl Scouts, and they want to help do something, and she won't let them because she knows she can do it better. Like, it's the choice, right? And in some way, you need to say that expressed. She needs to say that to someone. She needs to say it to her mom. Her mom's saying, you shouldn't do all this stuff by yourself. She's like, they can't do it.
They're not
They
good
won't
enough
do it
to
well.
do it.
Right. And, okay, well, now I know what she thinks about those other.
Which has nothing to do with ethnicity necessarily.
But her drive to be perfect comes out of her ethnicity, right? If we're saying that thing, right? She's feeling pressure from her immigrant forebears to fulfill the American dream or whatever it is, be super successful, get into Harvard.
Okay.
I know why she has that attitude that if she doesn't do it, she's the only one who can do it right because it has to be perfect because that's what's expected of her.
Right. So her parents feel inadequate. So they are driven to succeed beyond all measure.
And through her.
And then she feels that and has internalized it, and she's the one who's doing it to her friends.
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
Right. And you'd probably want a scene where you see that first, where you understand those pressures that are put upon her, and then you get a scene where you see it expressed by pushing people out of the way because she doesn't trust them to help fulfill that need, that drive.
So that's very different and interesting. That's very different than someone feeling inadequate because of their ethnicity.
That's the third scene, where you find out the reason they're so ferocious about it is because they feel inadequate.
Who's they? The mothers? The
No,
parents?
the girl.
The girl.
Elsie.
The girl. So Elsie feels inadequate because that's different. And that's interesting. That's where it gets a little blurry, right? Because that's a different motivation than the drive to, I get it, the drive to prove yourself because in your heart you feel inadequate. But I don't know if that's her challenge. And we're going down this road, Yasmin, just because this is the kind of stuff we would talk about, and this is where it can spiral. And
or this is where you build, right? Because you want layers on your character, and you want to understand pieces as you go, and it gets confusing at this very high altitude level because we're talking hypothetically about scenes that don't exist and they don't connect, and we haven't written any of the other scenes, and we don't know what they are. But as you're going along, you're going to want to see different pieces of how this stuff is affecting her, and you're probably going to want to see some of that through Priya, right? Through her friend, and how her friend. Maybe she sees something going on with her friend and her parents that strikes a chord with her, and she connects with Priya. Right? Maybe that's the first thing that makes her realize kind of why she's doing what she's doing. Say, and that's how you start to build the character and the self-realization is through different moments where we see the things that are shaping who she is and why she's doing what she's doing.
Yasmin, that's a lot to absorb. What do you think?
Yeah.
Because it's a lot of doubling back. It's a lot of details on details on details on something that doesn't exist, which is why I was trying to get some crappy scene.
But this is what I'm saying. But that's why it's actually the high altitude and not the details, right? It's just you just want to show different pieces of the character, right? How are you going to do that?
And the thing that I'm going back to, and this is where Jim and I are going to stop talking a minute because we're going back and forth on the same thing, is what I worry about is you can't have all of those elements. I think some of them are going to fall out. And you have to decide at some point, you know what, the inadequacy that it may be underlying the hyper ambition. Maybe I don't get to that. Maybe I don't get to that inadequacy. Maybe what drives that ambition, I don't really dig into in the script. Maybe you do. That's a choice. But I'm saying you can drop out different steps about this, which will happen naturally anyway, because you'll end up with a script that's all over the place, and then which most first drafts are, and then you'll start honing it and refining it and so forth.
Or you take, say, the inadequacy of it, and you put that into Priya's character, and that becomes her problem. So you still get a light that you're shining on the same sort of immigrant generational issues, but through a separate character, and now she has a motive, and she has a flavor that she's bringing to it. And they're bouncing off of each other in that way.
Yeah.
Because there's also, ethnic pride. Big fat Greek wedding. One of the best things about that Greek family was they thought the Greek way is the best way. And they were awesome because they were like, this is the best way to be. I have a friend of mine who's Indian American, and I know that not that deep underneath everything, she really thinks the Indian way is the best way. And I think it's fantastic because I benefit from it in all sorts of wonderful ways, not just food, but all sorts of learning about the culture, all that. And by the way, she's born in California, but her parents were immigrants. And she has no anxiety about being Indian, zero. She actually thinks it's superior. And that has driven her. And she is a highly ranked executive in an entertainment company, and she does very well. So there's so many ways to unpack this. I just think it's going to be about picking them. And I think Jim's idea of taking different things and giving them to different characters is smart, because then you can do a simple version of it instead of deeply multi-layered on each one, which will drive you insane.
And in truth, to lean into what Sam's saying, most of these ideas, if you're just sticking with one per character, there's 10 different things to say about any one of these things that in different scenes, because you're really just getting small emotional beats in the individual scenes that add up to what the character is and what they're struggling with.
Priya, do you watch that? What's that, Sex Education or something like that?
I
It's a
haven't watched
British show.
It's Sex Education on Netflix.
Yes. Have you seen that show?
Yeah.
Yes.
I've seen a bit of it. Not all of it. It's good though. It's really good.
It is really, I like it too. And the thing that it handles beautifully is the ethnicity of all the characters, because sometimes it really doesn't address them very much. And sometimes it does. I love that about it. It was just, I was going to say, that's one to check out for sure. Because there's an Indian family in that one, I think. And it's important in terms of some of the texture, but it's not important to what the characters do, because they're not driven out of their ethnicity. They're driven out of the fact that they're horny teenagers. and they're dealing with more, that general situation, which is right for a show named Sex Education.
And I think it's, I agree. I think it's really clever. And I also think what I have seen of it, it's also true. Like, I go through my life 99% of the time with, personally, I mean, obviously, we can get into the whole conversation of like unconscious bias and decisions and stuff, but I don't think that my ethnicity drives my decisions or anything. And then that 1% of the time, something will happen and I'll be like, oh yeah, okay.
Right.
I found it really, what I have seen of it was very true to life, I think.
You've really dug into some stuff that I was afraid to talk. I've been afraid to talk about it. So I thank you for that. Because this question of writing ethnicity is something I really want to talk about, but it's tricky to talk about for anybody, let alone a white guy. I'm desperate to have no unconscious bias. I want all my bias to be completely conscious. That's my goal in my life. I'm not saying I want to get rid of it. There are things I'm really biased against, but I want to know it. And these conversations really help, I think, with that, bringing that to the fore. Before we wrap this up, I just want to throw out one idea to help you kind of break this. Let's see what Jim thinks too. But I would take each character and write their arc for the whole, the 3-act structure, or however many acts, however you want to do it. A feature is 3 acts, but every book you read will tell you there's X number of moves,
number of acts, beats,
sub-acts,
whatever.
beats, and all that. But figure out their story, each character's story, but then also figure out the story of the troupe. And what's happening in the troop, and then figure out the story of the gang, because they're your antagonists, right? And figure out the story as another line. These are all different lines, right? That you're writing on a grid on your whiteboard. Figure out the story of the other Girl Scouts, meaning the ones that are not in this troop. They're going to have some they behave a certain way, even if you don't name them, although you probably will name a couple of them. And then figure out the storyline of the mom, or the other mom, or 2 moms if there are, whatever it is. And when you figure all that out on the board, step away from the board, because it'll be too hard to manage all that. But once you have all that grid, it frees up a lot, I find, when you get that going.
And the first step of that is to, when you go to each of these characters, is think about, what do they want? What is the thing this character wants, and what is the thing that's preventing them from getting it? Their fear, what happened to them in the past, whatever it is, what's getting in their way. And if you have that, you'll have some attitude for them, so that when you put these characters and scenes together, you kind of know the way they're coming at things differently.
Yeah, that's definitely the next step, no question about it. And it's part of that. The want thing is part of the arc, but keep it so simple, because you really are at 50,000 feet. And if you start getting down into scenes there, and it's not that scenes are going to come to you. And when they do come, write them down on a piece of paper and then put them off to the side, figuratively speaking. But don't go into scenes if you can avoid it, because those are the weeds.
Right, and I bring that up not to suggest scenes, but because if you're building an arc for the person across the story, it's going to reflect who they are and what they want. And they either get what they want or they don't at the end. And so you sort of need to know what that is as you're looking at those arcs for them.
Yeah, it's one of those things where just stay high up, high altitude, and then go down just a little bit at each time. And that'll keep you, that's the best, for us, remedy to not getting in the weeds, because you just can't. And then when you're writing a scene and you already know what every character in that scene wants, you can address it in a very small way. But the scenes will then be so much easier to write, because you already know all that stuff. Yasmin, it's been great to talk to you. This is really, getting into this kind of conversation is we need to have more of them.
And plus, we got to listen to your accent.
And the cautionary tale of leaving Chicago and trying to build a new network and going to something else. And I would just want to say your zigzag journey that you do is, everybody's journey is zigzag. There's one person I know who did not have a zigzag. That was like, I'm going to be a TV writer, set out to do it, and did it. early, and then just kept doing it. One person that we've ever met. Everybody else is zigzag all over the place. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Yasmin. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'll be back. I need more help with other things.
All right, we'll have you on.
Be well.
Bye. And that's all we've got for you this week. Our producer, J.R. Zamora-Thal, is working the mixing board.
Our logo was designed by Julien Debar-Monclair, and our music was provided by Boudereys out of Austin, Texas.
If you want to get in touch, we are at The Sam and Jim on Instagram and Twitter. And you can find us on Facebook and YouTube as The Writers' Room with Sam and Jim.
And if you like hanging out in the room with us, give us a follow on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And tell a friend, would you, so we can get JR paid. Thanks, everyone. See you next week.